What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices meets late-night television's most unpredictable host? You won't believe what unfolds when Morgan Freeman sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. Last night's episode delivered the kind of explosive confrontation that nobody saw coming, turning a simple chat into a career-defining moment that has the entire entertainment industry buzzing. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The tension was palpable from the moment Morgan Freeman walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage. What should have been a light-hearted conversation about Freeman's latest project quickly transformed into something far more sinister. The 76-year-old acting legend, known for his calm demeanor and thoughtful responses, appeared visibly uncomfortable as Kimmel launched into his opening questions with an unusually aggressive tone. "So Morgan, you've been in the business for decades," Kimmel began, his trademark smirk seeming more predatory than playful. "Tell me, do you ever get tired of playing the wise old mentor character? I mean, it's basically the same role over and over again, right?" Freeman's eyebrows raised slightly, a subtle sign that Kimmel had already crossed a line. "I wouldn't characterize my career that way, Jimmy. Each role brings its own challenges and rewards." But Kimmel wasn't backing down. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice taking on a mocking quality that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Come on, Morgan. The wise narrator, the sage advisor, the mystical guide. It's like you've cornered the market on telling other people what to do. Do you actually believe all that philosophical stuff you spout, or is it just good for business?" The camera caught Freeman's jaw tightening, his famous composure beginning to crack under Kimmel's relentless prodding. "I take my craft seriously, Jimmy. I don't spout anything. I bring authenticity to every character I portray." "Authenticity?" Kimmel laughed, but it wasn't the warm laughter his audience was used to. This was sharp, cutting. "That's rich coming from someone who's made millions playing God multiple times. Tell me, when you're up there pretending to be the Almighty, do you start believing your own hype?" The audience had gone completely silent. This wasn't the playful banter they expected from a late-night talk show. Freeman's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles visible beneath his skin. "I think you're misunderstanding the nature of acting, Jimmy. It's about bringing truth to fiction, not about ego." Kimmel's eyes glinted with something that looked almost malicious. "Truth to fiction? Is that what you call it when you lecture audiences about morality while living in your ivory tower? Must be nice to preach from such a high horse." The legendary actor's voice dropped to a dangerously low register, the same tone that had captivated audiences for decades now carrying an edge of genuine anger. "I've never claimed to be perfect, Jimmy, but I've always tried to use my platform responsibly. Something you might consider." That last comment hit its mark. Kimmel's facade of casual conversation completely dissolved, replaced by something uglier. "Responsibly? That's interesting coming from someone who's had their share of controversies. Should we talk about those, Morgan? I'm sure our audience would love to hear your thoughts on taking responsibility." Freeman's composure was hanging by a thread. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing every micro-expression as he processed Kimmel's increasingly hostile attacks. "I'm here to discuss my work, Jimmy, not to be subjected to a character assassination." "Character assassination?" Kimmel's voice rose, drawing gasps from the audience. "I'm just asking questions, Morgan. Isn't that what interviews are for? Or do you prefer the softball questions from your usual sycophantic interviewers?" The tension in the studio was suffocating. Freeman's publicist could be seen in the wings, frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers. But Kimmel was far from finished. He had tasted blood, and like a shark sensing weakness, he was moving in for the kill. "You know, what I think, Morgan," Kimmel continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "I think you've been playing characters for so long that you've forgotten who you really are. The wise sage act is just that, an act. Behind all that gravitas and those profound-sounding quotes, you're just another actor who's bought into his own publicity." Freeman's eyes flashed with genuine anger, his legendary calm finally beginning to crack. The man who had narrated documentaries about the cosmos, who had played presidents and prophets, was being systematically torn down by a host who seemed to relish every moment of discomfort he was causing. "I've been nothing but respectful to you and your show, Jimmy," Freeman said, his voice carrying a warning that Kimmel seemed determined to ignore. "But if you want to continue down this path—" "What path is that, Morgan?" Kimmel interrupted, his smile now completely predatory. "The path of honest conversation? Or are you so used to everyone kissing your ring that you can't handle a real interview?" The studio had become a powder keg, and everyone could feel that something explosive was about to happen. Freeman's breathing had become visibly deeper, his famous composure hanging by the thinnest of threads. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly no longer an interview, but a deliberate humiliation. What happened next would change everything, as Kimmel prepared to deliver the blow that would finally push Hollywood's most dignified actor past his breaking point. Kimmel leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a predator who had cornered his prey. The studio lights seemed to intensify the malicious gleam in his eyes as he prepared to cross a line that no professional interviewer should ever approach. "You know, Morgan, I've been doing some research before tonight's show. There are some interesting stories floating around about your behavior on sets. Care to comment on those allegations?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Freeman's entire body went rigid, his hands clenching into fists on the armrests of his chair. The legendary composure that had defined his 6-decade career was crumbling in real time, and every camera in the studio was capturing the destruction. "What exactly are you implying, Jimmy?" Freeman's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but the menace in it was unmistakable. The audience could feel the shift in energy, the way the very air seemed to crackle with impending disaster. Kimmel's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed predatory in the harsh studio lighting. "I'm not implying anything, Morgan. I'm asking direct questions. Isn't that refreshing? No scripted softballs, no predetermined talking points, just honest conversation between two men." "Honest?" Freeman's laugh was bitter, completely devoid of his usual warmth. "There's nothing honest about ambushing a guest with unsubstantiated gossip. This isn't journalism, Jimmy. This is a hit job." The host shrugged with theatrical indifference, as if Freeman's obvious distress was merely an inconvenience to his entertainment. "Hit job? That's a strong accusation, Morgan. I'm just trying to give our audience the full picture. They deserve to know who they're really watching on screen, don't you think?" "The full picture?" Freeman's voice rose for the first time since the interview began, drawing audible gasps from the studio audience. "You want the full picture? Let me paint one for you, Jimmy. A so-called comedian who's built his career on cheap shots and manufactured controversy, hiding behind the facade of late-night entertainment while systematically destroying his guests' reputations for ratings." The accusation hit Kimmel like a physical blow, his smug expression faltering for just a moment before hardening into something genuinely ugly. That's rich coming from someone whose entire persona is built on pretending to be wise and moral, while the rumors swirl about what really happens when the cameras stop rolling. Freeman stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward, the sudden movement causing several audience members to audibly gasp. His towering presence, usually comforting and paternal, now seemed genuinely intimidating as he loomed over Kimmel's desk. "You want to talk about what happens when cameras stop rolling? Let's discuss your reputation among the people who actually work with you, Jimmy. The stories about your treatment of staff, your ego, your complete lack of professionalism." "Sit down, Morgan," Kimmel said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Freeman's incredulous laugh echoed through the studio. "You've been systematically attacking my character and integrity." For the past 10 minutes, and I'm making a scene? This is exactly the kind of gaslighting behavior that's made you so toxic to work with. The studio had become a battlefield, with two titans of entertainment locked in a confrontation that had spiraled completely out of control. Kimmel's producers were frantically signaling from the wings, but their host seemed oblivious to everything, except his desire to land another devastating blow. Toxic? Kimmel's voice cracked slightly. That's interesting coming from someone who's been whispered about in Hollywood circles for years. Tell me, Morgan, do you think your fans would still worship you if they knew the real man behind the voice? That was the final straw. Freeman's famous restraint, built over decades of professionalism and grace under pressure, finally shattered completely. His voice, when he spoke, carried the full weight of his fury and disappointment. The real man behind the voice is someone who's dedicated his entire career to meaningful work, to telling stories that matter, to treating every person he encounters with dignity and respect. Something you clearly know nothing about. Dignity and respect? Kimmel was practically shouting now, all pretense of conducting an interview abandoned. Is that what you call it when you use your status to intimidate people into silence? When you hide behind your reputation while engaging in behavior that would end anyone else's career? The accusation was so vague yet so venomous that it left Freeman momentarily speechless. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what had become less an interview than a public execution. Freeman's breathing was labored, his usual eloquence, replaced by raw, unfiltered emotion. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," Freeman said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You're throwing around accusations without evidence, without context, without any regard for the damage you're doing. This isn't entertainment, Jimmy. This is character assassination, pure and simple." Kimmel leaned forward, sensing weakness, like a shark smelling blood in the water. Character assassination? Or just accountability? Maybe it's time someone asked the hard questions instead of letting you coast on your reputation. Hard questions? Freeman's voice rose to a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. "You haven't asked a single legitimate question tonight. You've done nothing but launch personal attacks based on rumors and innuendo. This isn't journalism. It's not entertainment. It's just cruelty disguised as comedy." The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, with both men standing now facing each other across the desk like gladiators in an arena. The audience sat transfixed, unable to look away from the carnage unfolding before them. What had started as a routine promotional interview had become something unprecedented in late-night television history. But Kimmel wasn't finished. He had one more card to play, one final devastating blow that would push the situation beyond any possibility of recovery. "You know what, Morgan?" Kimmel's voice took on a sickeningly sweet tone that made everyone in the studio recoil. "Since we're talking about accountability and hard questions, maybe we should discuss your granddaughter. I'm sure she's proud of her grandfather's legacy. Does she know about all these stories? Does she still look up to you the same way?" The moment those words left Kimmel's mouth, the entire studio fell into a silence so profound it was almost suffocating. Freeman's face went through a transformation that was terrifying to witness. The anger that had been building throughout the interview crystallized into something far more dangerous. His eyes, usually warm and inviting, turned cold as winter steel. "Don't you dare," Freeman said, his voice so low and menacing that several audience members visibly shrank back in their seats. "Don't you ever mention my family again?" But Kimmel had crossed the Rubicon and seemed incapable of stopping himself. "Oh, now we're getting somewhere. The great Morgan Freeman finally shows his true colors when someone threatens to expose him to the people he actually cares about. Tell me, does your granddaughter know that her hero might not be the man she thinks he is?" What happened next was unlike anything in late-night television history. Freeman's legendary composure didn't just crack, it exploded. His voice, when he spoke, carried decades of accumulated dignity and respect that was now being weaponized against his tormentor. "You pathetic, small-minded little man," Freeman said, each word delivered with surgical precision. "In 60 years of this business, I have never encountered someone as professionally bankrupt and morally corrupt as you are right now. You hide behind comedy to justify cruelty, behind entertainment to excuse character assassination." Kimmel tried to interrupt, but Freeman continued, his voice growing stronger and more commanding with each sentence. "You want to talk about my granddaughter? Let me tell you what she knows. She knows her grandfather has spent his entire career treating every person he meets with respect and dignity. She knows he's worked with hundreds of actors, directors, and crew members who would vouch for his character without hesitation." The studio audience began to murmur, sensing the tide turning. Freeman stepped closer to Kimmel's desk, his presence filling the entire space. "But most importantly, she knows the difference between a man who builds people up and one who tears them down for sport. She knows the difference between someone who uses their platform to inspire and someone who uses it to destroy." Kimmel's face had gone pale, the reality of what he had unleashed finally dawning on him. "Morgan, I think we should—" "No." Freeman cut him off with a voice that brooked no argument. "You wanted accountability? You wanted hard questions? Then answer this. What kind of man ambushes a guest with unsubstantiated rumors? What kind of professional uses a platform watched by millions to launch personal attacks? What kind of human being brings someone's family into their twisted game?" The questions hung in the air like indictments, each one landing with devastating accuracy. Freeman's voice continued to build, drawing on the same power that had narrated countless documentaries and brought gravitas to every role he'd ever played. "I came here tonight to discuss my work, to connect with your audience, to be a professional. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a public lynching by someone who masquerades as an entertainer while engaging in the worst kind of tabloid journalism." Kimmel was now visibly sweating, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "I was just trying to—" "You were trying to destroy me for ratings," Freeman interrupted, his voice now carrying the full weight of his moral authority. "You thought you could tear down someone who's spent decades building a reputation based on integrity and respect. You thought wrong." The audience was now completely silent, witnessing what felt less like an interview and more like a reckoning. Freeman straightened to his full height, every inch the commanding presence that had dominated screens for generations. "Let me make something crystal clear to you and to everyone watching," Freeman continued, his voice steady and implacable. "I have made mistakes in my life, as every human being has. But I have never, not once, used my position to harm or intimidate anyone. I have never hidden behind comedy to justify cruelty. And I have never dragged someone's family into a professional disagreement because I lacked the courage to face them as an equal." The words hit Kimmel like physical blows, each accusation more devastating than the last. Freeman began moving toward the edge of the interview area, his intentions becoming clear. "This interview is over," Freeman announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio. "Not because I'm running from your questions, but because I refuse to participate in whatever sick entertainment you think you're providing. I refuse to validate this behavior by remaining here 1 second longer." Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Morgan, please, let's just—" "No," Freeman said with finality that left no room for negotiation. "There is no coming back from what you've done here tonight. You've shown your true character, and I've shown mine. Let the audience decide which one they respect." With that, Freeman turned and began walking toward the exit, his movement deliberate and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most respected figures prepared to walk out on live television. "You want to know what accountability looks like, Jimmy?" Freeman called over his shoulder without breaking stride. "It looks like walking away from people who mistake cruelty for entertainment." It looks like refusing to participate in someone else's moral bankruptcy. As Freeman reached the edge of the stage, he paused for one final moment, turning back to address not Kimmel, but the cameras directly. To everyone watching at home, remember this: dignity isn't something that can be taken from you. It can only be given away. I'm keeping mine. And with that, Morgan Freeman walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a host whose reputation would never recover, and an audience that had witnessed the complete destruction of what was supposed to be light entertainment. The sound of the stage door closing behind him echoed through the studio like a judge's gavel, final and absolute. The camera captured Kimmel sitting alone at his desk, the smug confidence that had started the evening replaced by the dawning realization of what his behavior had cost him. The silence stretched on, broken only by the uncomfortable shuffling of an audience that had just witnessed television history, and the spectacular fall of a host who had forgotten that respect, once lost, can never truly be regained.